this way. Put you under. Now go the other way. As well as you. You go this way.
A little bit of Paul Brown. Chill out. Dr. Doug here with the KRV FM Art and Soul of San Antonio. Right now it's 12:38. Sorry for the late start on Lunch and Learn. Actually, those of you that were listening on the air, this is my second attempt at doing this because the first time I didn't have my monitor working. So we got everything working now. Appreciate you or your patience. And once again, I apologize if this is a do-over. But so let's get right to it. Today we're going to be talking about ethical climate. And ethical climate's received a lot of attention from researchers, and it's been applied to many academic research on identifications and related issues of ethical climates. But it's surprising, though, even though ethical research has addressed the roles of leaders and organizational structure and alignment with respect to ethical climates, not much is done that's looked at what actually causes or how an ethical climate is actually generated or created. Now, these two guys by the name of Victor and Cullen, they created a topology that kind of like defines ethical climates, that the components of an ethical climate. And that's too long for this Lunch and Learn, but if you need it, I can put it together and I can send it to you. But it serves to say that leaders can utilize many practices to embed priorities and values that impact the day-to-day decision-making of the people in their organization. That's whether it's an organization, whether it's a company, whether it's a society, whether it's your staff, whatever it is, okay? In recent review of corporate scandals, and we're not talking about recent review, we'll go back as far as Enron, as far as WorldCom, Enron, and those kind of people, and it showed that employees were seldom involved in decision-making, and it also showed a lack of appropriate communications throughout those entities. And those were basically the overarching reason for those scandals and the demise of those organizations. I mean, the total demise. At one point in time, WorldCom was the largest organization, the largest company in the world, and then boom, they were gone, just like that, because of ethics. So, okay, when you look at it, these examples show that, like I just said, poor communications and lack of empowerment are the two critical components of scandal, and they can turn in organizational communication, organizational empowerment. They're critical practices for managing ethical climate. So I just talked about the whole what goes into ethical climate, communications, and empowerment. So when you think about it, well, let's not do this. Let's go here first. When I talk about ethical climate, let's make sure that we're all on the same page. Okay. The definition of an ethical climate is a shared perceptions of what is ethically correct behavior and how ethical issues should be handled. Okay? So now, that as a backdrop, let's think about it. There's a little doubt that good communication is vital for an organizational effectiveness or for the effectiveness of a staff or a society. It's been recognized as one of the key components or key competencies when it comes to ethics. The functions of communications within an organization, they include control, motivation, emotional expression, information diffusion. Communication can be seen as a process of information exchange through various communications channels. When I say various channels, we're talking about things like meetings, group discussions. They can be written, such as emails or faxes. They can be nonverbal, such as body language. And basically, the most popular method by which members of organizations transfer meaning. So, that's body language. And so, when you think about it, let's think about the current administration in Washington D.C. And when you look there, I'll tell you what, more so than any other time, body language has meaning. People will look at how our president, what his body language is when they make certain statements. You can see their reaction. You see his reaction. There's a lot said that's not being said there. Now, there's current literature that they provide a lot of insight into the relationship between communications and ethics. For instance, we talked about Enron and we talked about WorldCom. But Enron, a lack of communication within the organization was the essential reason for the failure of that organization. there was lack of communication created a vacuum in which employees were most likely to experience little guilt when they behaved unethically. You know why? You know why there was no guilt? Because there were no flyers, there were no signs, there was no only thing at that Enron that was consistent. Whenever you got off the elevator, there was a stock price there. You walked into the lobby, there was a stock price there, and they talked about the value, the shareholder value, and the stock price, and that's what they hammered over and over and over again throughout there. I knew people that worked at WorldCom. That stock price thing was so huge and so prevalent that that's all people focused on. So what they did, they made sure that the bottom line was high no matter what they had to do, because the ends justified the means. So now the other thing is, a lack of communication also means a lack of openness when we talk about problems, because if there's a lack of openness, then that means people are afraid to share bad information. So if something bad happens, what they do, they kept it to themselves. When I was in a leadership position, significant leadership positions, first thing I told everybody, my number one rule was no surprises. So if it happened, I don't care how bad it is, tell me. I don't care what time in the morning you got to call me. Just deal with it front on, get something resolved, calm everybody down, and let's come up with a resolution in the right way. Let's not do it in secret, not do it under cloak and dagger, but so no surprises. Now, when I talked about here, if you the absence of communications, they give subordinates a powerful sign to interpret the assumptions and the values of an organization. So if you don't go right out and just say, I want things done the right way, it's not what gets done, but it's how it gets done that's most important, then they're going to assume that anything is fair. Okay? So we talk about specific climates and how communications affect specific climates. Frequent communication within an organization has a positive effect on the ethical decision making of its employees. Irrespective of the content of the communications, as individuals communicate with each other more frequently, they are more likely to learn and take from others' needs and perspectives into account, consequently engage in more ethical decision making. So the more you talk, the more you communicate, the more you get to know the people around you, the more you get to understand their values. And as you understand their values, the less likely you'll be to do something that's unethical. I mean, you think about this whole thing here. Look at all of the people with Epstein. Can you believe how many people are involved in this whole scandal? I mean, and the names of the people who are involved. It's unbelievably crazy. And you know, it's a lack of ethics all the way through, because even up until his death, when he got off suicide watch, what did he do? He paid his way off of suicide watch. And that's unethical. You're not supposed to be able to do that. It's just not a good thing. They're in Arizona, they're in Virgin Islands. And when you look at the whole thing with this new administration that's taken over since the last election, it's all anything goes, as long as the people who are important to the people in office, to the person in office, are taken care of. And so that's the and I don't mean to sound like Bernie Sanders, but that's the 1%ers out there. You know, they got their tax cut, and so that, as long as everybody got their tax cut, the deficit no longer matters. How much I spend on the military no longer matters. How I treat immigrants no longer matters. How I treat women no longer matters. None of those things matter. And so that's what happens. We talk about a lack of communication. I remember I talked about frequent ways of holding or processing information through various exchanges, like meetings and those types of things. Check this out. Yesterday, when they had the press conference to talk about the new way that they're going to treat people with green cards, that was the first press briefing that's been had by this administration in 5.5 months. So that tells you, how can you convey an ethical climate and you're not having press briefings? That it just can't be done. It can't be done. You know, there are meetings that are held and no one understands who's doing what, who's on first, who's supposed to be what. They just kind of look at body language from the person in charge, and hopefully that they interpret that body language correctly. Now, so when we look at this whole thing, communications can facilitate the development of benevolent local climates, and also discouraging egotistical local climates within an organization. It's also recognized as a control mechanism with a significant role in constantly reminding employees of stated codes of ethics. By regularly communicating with employees through either formal meetings or informal conversations, leadership can ensure subordinates do not forget the breach of ethical codes and rules. Moreover, as codes and ethics might be written ambiguously, it suggests that effective communication by managers can only be necessary to ensure that these ethics in ethical climate exist. Okay, now the other thing is, what I talked about here, is empowerment. So if you don't empower people, then that means that people are going to just assume that they can't make a decision for themselves. You don't trust them to make a decision for themselves. Therefore, they're going to do exactly what you tell them to do whenever you tell them to do it. And why is that? Why is that a bad thing? Because no one person knows everything that everyone does. If you're president of the United States, you might be a real smart person, you might be a great negotiator, but there's no way you can know what 12,000 employees know. There's no way. So if you want to dictate to each and every one of those 12,000 employees, good luck. But what's going to happen is they no longer will accept responsibility for their actions because they did what you told them to do as a leader. That's a problem. When I'm going to close up, and when I get to the end of this, we're going to see why these things are important and why I chose to talk about ethics today. It's going to become abundantly clear very shortly here. It's often manifest when employees take on responsibilities traditionally assigned to supervisors or to their leaders. Then, like if you look at Toyota, for instance. At Toyota, you can be an assembly line worker, but if you see a mistake, you have the power to stop the assembly lines. Same thing at Norton's, at the department store. You're empowered at Nordstrom's to take whatever decision you need to make sure that quality and ethical standards are adhered to. And it was that way with Levi Strauss when they were here in San Antonio. Empowerment includes 4 dimensions. That is meaning, competence, self-determination, and impact. And when you focus on self-determination, because it embodies the essence of empowerment, that to the degree that which employees perceive they have choice and autonomy in their daily activities. That when they have that autonomy of empowerment, self-determination, that is a direct correlation. Self-determination is a direct correlation to an ethical climate. So empowerment and communications are the 2 things that are essential in an ethical climate, and those are things that are just totally missing here. So and it's missing. Not just and let me put this back into context, because I keep saying organization, society, individuals, and I'm kind of using them interchangeably, and I'm doing that on purpose because whether it's an organization, whether it's a society, it's the same. Lack of an ethical climate can mean the demise, as we looked at in the example with Nordstrom's, but not Nordstrom's, with Enron and with WorldCom. Absence of an ethical climate can lead to its demise. Okay, and that's the key point here. That is the whole linchpin of this discussion. So when subordinates are empowered, they're more likely to make decisions based on collective interest and principle than on maximization of an organization's or society's self-interest. Consequently, empowerment facilitates the development of benevolent local type of climate while discouraging egotistical types of climate within a society or an organization. That's it in a nutshell. Now, we're talking about this because there's a substantial cost associated with unethical behavior in an unethical climate. And those significant impacts of unethical climates, that can be just totally damaging to a society and an organization. So when you think about this, so like here, all these things that have happened lately, we're the way that we treat people, the least of us are treated really horribly, while the best of us or the biggest of us and the richest of us are treated and given preferential treatment. We no longer have as a priority of taking care of our young. They're being treated as pawns in a game as far as the way that we are handling these school shootings, these mass killings, the way that we handle the children on the border. And in the past, those things never would have happened. And then maybe some of this is happening because of the advent of social media and everything is, you have instant communications. But the other thing is, they're still happening, and it's something that we have to do and we have to pay attention to, because we all are going to suffer. They're no longer any type of protections for endangered species. That's another thing that's happening. That's not ethical. It's not ethical for us to just assume that this generation here today can consume all the resources for the rest of the world and just forget our future generations. It's just crazy to assume that. It's crazy to assume that a person needs 100-round clip to protect their home. I mean, this is not NCIS LA where LL Cool J needs to shoot 47 times to hit one person. I mean, if you have a gun and you can't use it properly to defend yourself with a clip of 6 bullets in it, maybe you shouldn't have a gun. But you need 100 rounds, and that's supposed to be for your protection? I don't think so. And so when we look at great civilizations throughout, look at the Roman Empire, look at the Germans, the German empire. Look at the Soviet Union, and the use of. And I'm not going to go all the way back to ancient civilizations. Let's look at the Roman Empire. Let's look at Great Britain. Let's look at Germany. Let's look at Russia. Now let's look at and compare them all those to the United States. Cultures and civilizations go through cycles, and over time, many civilizations and cultures have risen and fallen. Now, this experiment that we call the United States, this democratic experiment, this is one thing where we can say it's never been done before. Never have the people had a voice like we have here. As bad as it is today, we still have a voice. We still, even though we don't vote, we used to be the number one democracy in the world because everybody voted, but now only about 50% of us vote. And while Vietnam, who we used to be at war with, they're the number one society for voting because everybody there votes. Go figure that one out. As far as mass shootings, we had 259 mass shootings in 215 days this year. The next second highest number of mass shootings was like China, I believe, and they only had 3. So we just think about this. What I'm about to say, this whole thing about the rise and fall of great societies. Because for those of us who love our country and our culture, it's going to be painful. But by God's grace, many flowers have come from the Western culture. It has grown, and we've done great. We've had the things that we've done for the world have been outstanding. But now we're kind of seem like we're in a tailspin. We're greed, aversion to sacrifice, secularism, divorce, promiscuity, destruction of the most basic unit of civilization, which is our families. It doesn't make for a healthy culture. And when you look at what sociologists and anthropologists have described as the rise and fall of the world's great civilizations, we are approaching that. I really do believe that. Unless we make some significant changes, a significant transformation, that is where we are. So here, when you think about this person here, I'm going to find this person's name, Alexander Tylan from the University of Edinburgh. He noted 8 stages that articulate what history discloses. That is like the fall of great civilizations. So here, the rise and fall. So here, the first one, they go from bondage to spiritual growth. So most great civilizations are formed in the crucible. The ancient Jews were in bondage 400 years in Egypt. The Christian faith and the church came around 300 years after 300 years of persecution. Western Christendom emerged after chaotic conflicts during the decline of the Roman Empire. And fierce barbarian tribes. American culture was formed by the injustice that grew in the colonial times. Sufferings and injustice caused and even forced spiritual growth. So suffering brings wisdom and demands a spiritual discipline that seeks justice and solution. So we went from bondage to spiritual growth here in the United States. From spiritual growth to great courage. Now, the great courage thing, I don't have to explain that. You guys all know that how many times throughout the history of this country, the great courage has been demonstrated by all folks, black folks, white folks, men, women, Oriental, Muslims, Christians, by everybody. They've got examples of great courage. From courage to liberty. As a result of a courageous fight, the foe is vanquished, liberty and greater justice emerges. At this point in civilization comes forth, rooted in its greatest ideals. I thought the things I witnessed in the 60s, in the 60s, they were tough times because, back then we used to hide under our desks because we were afraid that the Russians or that the Soviet Union was going to send a nuclear bomb over. But other than that, and while we were still, as an African American, we're still treated in many ways as second-class citizens, you could see the future look bright. You could see things changing. You could see things fighting for justice and equality. You saw more and more people jump into that because why? It was the ethical thing to do. Everybody was communicating. We had meetings, and everything. We had communications things. We had black newspapers all over the place. We had things going on where everybody said together that, hey, treating one race differently from everybody else is not right. It's unethical. And so we went from courage to liberty. From liberty to abundance. We look at abundance, let's just use, the 80s as an example of abundance. And the 70s, everybody had everything, and it was kind of crazy. But, we were still growing, things were still going well. From abundance to complexity. And I think that complexity, I think that happened, in the late 90s, the early 2000s. We had the big, huge recession. From complacency to apathy. From apathy to dependence. And from dependence back to bondage. And when you look at what we're doing today, when you're talking about sending people back to where they came from, when you're talking about people going around and doing things that they're doing to people without any fear or repercussion, when you get a person that drives 10 hours across the state to kill Mexicans, when you get the thing, it's just that those things aren't coincidental. They're not coincidental. Behavior, followership comes from leadership. And right now, if we're going to continue to be the great country and leave a place for our children and grandchildren to grow up and to prosper like we have, then we have to undergo a transformation. We have to get back to an ethical climate. We have to get back to when doing the right thing is doing the right thing. We can't just get back. We can't sit back and close our eyes and say, we got somebody here that's treating somebody bad. And even though I go to church every Sunday, I'm going to close my eyes and pretend like I didn't see it. We can't do that. We can't allow that to happen. If we do, we all will suffer. We need a transformation. We need leadership, not to fight with each other, not to argue with each other. We need to say, hey, you know what? We're going to take the bull by the horn, and we're going back to doing things the right way. We're going back to making sure that we're the leader in the world when it comes to liberty, when it comes to freedom, when it comes to freedom of press. Now all of a sudden we're treating our press like they're in Russia. Pretty soon we'll be locking them up. This whole thing, lock up your opposition, lock up the press, lock up anybody who doesn't agree with me. I heard yesterday that the president told something like 13,000 lies that they done in fact checks. That's just insane. It's insane. Anyway, I've taken up too much time today, but I've got to tell you this. Ethics are important. Unless we all start with ourselves and behave ethically, speak ethically, and treat others ethically, we're bound to be another great culture that has found its demise. Dr. Doug here with the KRV FM, the Heart and Soul of San Antonio. This Lunch and Learn was not necessarily the views of people here or the leadership of KRV FM. They were my views only. So have a great day. It's 1 o'clock and we'll be back.